Did you know that God promised Israel a much larger territory than it currently has? And is this prophecy already being fulfilled? Discover these answers in this video filled with curiosities about Israel and its prophecies. We know that despite being a small country, it is surrounded by Muslim nations, including Lebanon to the north, Syria to the northeast, Jordan to the east, and Egypt to the southwest. Since declaring its independence on May 14, 1948, Israel has been involved in 16 wars with its neighbors. Daily, the nation of about 9.6 million people faces numerous attempts of terrorist attacks. Fortunately, the Israeli police can detect and prevent the majority of these attacks. However, the complexity of Israel's neighbors is evident, as it is considered the only democracy in the Middle East, surrounded by countries that aspire to see it thrown into the Mediterranean Sea. Before we continue, I am Bruno Cordero, and I want to ask you, do you know which country borders the left side of Israel? Egypt, Jordan, or Syria? Comment below and stay until the end of the video to find out. And if you enjoy the content, subscribe and leave a like. Let's go. The conflict between Jews and Muslims over the ownership of the land is well known, but the text questions whether Israel only controls a fraction of the promised land in the Bible. In this episode, the analysis focuses on a special promise made to Israel by God, exploring the geographical implications if Israel were to claim this land. It is worth noting that, in terms of size, the United States is about 448 times larger than Israel. While Israel covers approximately 21,937 square kilometers, the United States has around 9,833,517 square kilometers, making it 4,472 times larger than Israel. The divine promise emphasizes that the nation of Israel will possess lands from the Nile River to the Euphrates River, representing a territory of about 2,387,669 square kilometers, equivalent to the territory of Kazakhstan. The episode goes back to the special promise given to Abraham in Genesis, mentioning the covenant made with him by God, promising his descendants the land that extends from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates River. The Nile and Euphrates rivers are crucial to understanding the history of Israel, as it is at the mouth of the Euphrates River that the history of Israel begins, in the Asian city of Ur. Abraham begins his journey from the city of Ur to the promised land around 3,000 years before Christ, the land that now comprises the state of Israel. The Oak of Moreh in Shechem becomes a significant landmark in the narrative, inhabited at the time by the Canaanites. This detail is relevant because in 1948, despite the land not being an uninhabited desert, God promises Abraham the possession of that land. The strongest affirmation occurs in Genesis 14 verse 14, where God assures that the land will be given to the descendants of Abraham forever. This promise is reiterated for Isaac and, subsequently, for Jacob, highlighting continuity through the generations. The text emphasizes that the promise of the land is specifically for the spiritual descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, excluding other sons like Ishmael. Symbolism is evident when Isaac is born, and Ishmael and his mother need to leave Abraham's tents, indicating that the promise will continue only through Isaac and his descendants. Even before birth, God foresaw that Jacob would be the chosen one and that the younger son, Jacob, would receive the benefits of the promise made to his grandfather Abraham. Surprisingly, Isaac favored his older son, Esau, and if it depended on him, Esau would be the stronger brother to carry on the promise. However, that was not God's plan. Thus, Jacob becomes the ancestor of the nation of Israel, being the father of 12 sons who constituted the 12 tribes of Israel. Returning to the history of Israel, we observe that the events experienced by the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob serve as a microcosm of what will happen with the entire nation. They all left the promised land and lived in foreign countries. Abraham, for example, went to Egypt, where he lied to the Pharaoh about Sarah being his sister. The possible threat to the promised lineage was avoided thanks to God's intervention. Isaac, on his way to Egypt, was stopped by God in Gerar, the land of Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Like his father, Isaac lied by calling Rebekah his sister, causing envy among the Philistines due to his prosperity. This prosperity led Isaac to be forced to leave the foreign land and return to the promised land. Jacob left the land twice. Firstly, when young, he fled from the wrath of his brother Esau, going to live in Paddan Aram, located between Syria and Turkey. On this occasion, Jacob did not deceive but was deceived by Laban, suffering envy due to his prosperity. The second time Jacob left the land was as an elder, after which he never returned. On his deathbed, he ordered his sons to bury him in the tomb of Abraham and Isaac, in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. thus concluding the cycle of the three patriarchs in the land promised by God. The Nile and Euphrates rivers become landmarks in the history of Israel. The Nile, being Egypt's largest river, contributed to the rise of this Asian country. Egypt served as a place of exile not only for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also for Jacob's 12 sons, who formed the nation of Israel. Israel's presence in Egypt was not random, but foreseen by God in the first book of Moses. On the same day he made the promise to Abraham that the newly created nation would spend 400 years there. The Euphrates River, another great river, contributed to the development of powerful nations like Babylon and Persia. It is where the history of Israel began, where Abraham was called, and also where the Jewish people were exiled for 700 years. Returning to the original promise of the land given to Abraham, we see that the boundaries of the two great rivers were set at their shores. Crucial events occurred, such as the return of the Hebrews from Egypt after 400 years of exile and the return of the Jewish nation from Persia after another 70 years of exile. If we interpret literally the promise given to Abraham, Israel is promised a much larger land than it currently possesses, spanning 2,387,669 square kilometers from the Nile to the Euphrates. Some argue that the promise was fulfilled in Solomon's time. However, Solomon never reached as far as the Nile in his territorial conquests, and his kingdom was quickly divided and diminished. Others suggest that the promise no longer applies, but this view faces challenges as God promised an eternal covenant, enduring forever, not just during Solomon's brief reign. Therefore, the fact that Israel occupied the land at a specific moment in history does not nullify the ongoing promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Additionally, it is valid to acknowledge that the New Testament identifies Christians as spiritual descendants of Abraham. However, as mentioned earlier, Abraham had several descendants, and the promise of the land was specifically passed down to Isaac and later to Jacob. The New Testament does not refer to Christians as spiritual descendants of Jacob, and it is crucial to remember that the descendants of Jacob constitute the nation of Israel. God, as we know, extended his grace to Hagar and Ishmael, granting them a distinct promise. Therefore, although Christians may share some blessings due to the spiritual heritage acquired through faith, this does not turn them into the new Israel. Israel remains Israel, and Christians identify as Christians. Of course, descendants of Jacob can accept Christ and become Christians, but Christians, unless they are descendants of Jacob, cannot identify as Israel. This distinction is clear, although it may generate confusion at times. It might be helpful to explore this topic in a specific episode in the future. In summary, Israel does not fully occupy the land promised by God. The current state of Israel represents only a fraction of the territory promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Even adopting the minimalist view, from the Nile to the Euphrates, as seen in the territories conquered by Solomon, Israel's history is intrinsically linked to both the Nile and the Euphrates. Although these rivers are currently in the territories of Egypt and other nations, Israel maintains God's eternal promise that, in the future, this territory will belong to the chosen nation. Did you like this video? Make a donation of any amount to the channel and help us produce more videos like this and spread the gospel to more people. Click on the link in the first pinned comment. We appreciate your generosity. The quiz answer is Egypt. Comment if you got it right. And watch now the video we made talking even more about this topic. Click on the suggestion that appears on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you there.